If you had met me 10 or 15 years ago, you would not have recognized the person I am now. I looked like a functioning adult male by all usual standards. I showed up to work, paid my bills, fixed things around the house, cracked jokes at family gatherings. But if you had watched me closely in my relationship, you would have seen something quieter, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. You would have seen a man slowly living less and less from the inside out, and more from the outside in. A man for whom the question, "What do I actually want?" had been quietly replaced by, "What will keep her from being disappointed with me tonight?" It didn't begin with shouting. That's what confuses a lot of men. If there had been dramatic scenes early on, plates thrown, doors slammed, messages screaming in all caps, maybe I would have seen it faster. Instead, it started with tiny signals. The kind of moments most people brush off. A sigh when I came home later than expected. An eye roll when I forgot something small. A subtle shift in tone when I mentioned a plan that didn't include her. None of it felt big enough to make a fuss over. So I didn't. I simply adjusted. I came home earlier next time. I double-checked my to-do list. I stopped mentioning certain plans. This is how erosion works in relationships. It is almost never one big storm that takes down the cliff. It is the constant, quiet waves that reshape the shoreline while nobody is paying attention. I remember standing in my own kitchen one evening, watching her move around the room with that familiar combination of tension and busyness. I had worked long hours that day and picked up dinner on the way home. I put the food on the table, proud of myself for being practical, for saving her time. She looked at the bags, then at me, and said, "You couldn't at least choose something healthier?" That was it. No screaming, no curses, just that sentence, heavy with implication, and then the cold silence of someone who feels justified in being disappointed. What I felt in that moment is hard to explain. If you've never experienced it, it wasn't guilt exactly. I hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't simple sadness either. It was a kind of shrinking inside my own skin, as if the part of me that had been proud of my small effort suddenly got yanked backward like a dog on a leash. Instead of thinking, "She is being rude," I immediately thought, "I should have done better." That is the first sign that something is off. When your natural reaction to being undervalued is not anger or clear protest, but self-doubt and a rush to fix. Over time, I noticed that my inner questions changed. When I was younger and single, I made choices by asking myself things like, "Does this fit my values? Will this move me toward who I want to be?" Later, inside this relationship, the questions had quietly become, "Will this upset her? Will this make her think I don't care? Will this trigger an argument that I'm too tired to have?" I missed job opportunities because she worried about the hours. I stopped seeing certain friends because she didn't like them. I gave up hobbies that she found childish or a waste of time. None of these sacrifices would have been evil if they were conscious choices made from a place of mutual respect. But that was not what was happening. I was not negotiating, I was preemptively surrendering. Because I had learned to fear her disapproval more than I respected my own desires. There is a psychological mechanism here that I didn't understand at the time. Many boys grow up in environments where their worth feels conditional. They're good when they're quiet, helpful, and not too demanding, and bad when they have needs. emotions, or individuality that inconveniences the adults around them. Those boys often become men who unconsciously look for the same pattern in their romantic lives. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because the feeling of constantly trying to prove themselves feels strangely familiar. It feels like home. When such a man meets a partner who has her own unresolved wounds, fears of abandonment, hunger for control, a deep insecurity about her own worth, a dangerous dance begins. She tests him with small criticisms and demands. He proves he is good. By adapting faster and faster, she grows more anxious and controlling, because no amount of reassurance ever fills the hole inside her. He grows more exhausted and hollow, because no amount of effort ever secures the approval he is chasing. Both of them are miserable, but the dynamic has its own addictive rhythm, and breaking it feels like tearing off your own skin. In a healthy relationship, partners notice and appreciate each other's efforts. Even tasks that could be seen as basic, working, parenting, cleaning, are still occasions for a simple, thank you. Because gratitude isn't just about the difficulty of the task, it's about recognition of the person. In an unhealthy dynamic, however, one partner's contributions slowly get redefined as bare minimum. He works long hours? That is simply what men are supposed to do. He plays with the children? That's just being a father. He tries to plan something special? Other men do more. Once everything has become an obligation instead of a gift. Resentment has fertile soil. She feels she is doing more, feeling more, sacrificing more. He feels invisible, unappreciated, and eventually numb. I have sat with men in my office whose entire body posture told the story. Shoulders slumped forward, hands loosely folded, eyes dull. They did not come in raging about crazy women, they came in whispering, I don't know who I am anymore. If this were only about one angry woman and one passive man, it would be simple, but this pattern is plugged into deeper beliefs in our culture. Many men are taught, directly or indirectly, that their job is to make their partner happy. That a woman's mood is a report card on his masculinity. If she is upset, he has failed. If she is distant, he has failed. If she is unsatisfied with her life, he has failed. It is a heavy, impossible assignment. To be responsible not just for your own choices, but for the permanent, emotional climate inside another human being. I used to live that way. Every morning felt like an exam I had not studied enough for. Was the coffee strong enough? Did I remember the small detail she mentioned last week? Did I send a message at the right time? It sounds trivial when listed out. But when those micro-tests never stop, your nervous system never rests. You begin to live in a state of low-level alarm, always scanning for the next thing that might provoke displeasure. Your world shrinks. You take fewer risks. You say, it's fine, when it's not. Because conflict feels like stepping into a courtroom where you will always be found guilty. From the outside, this can look like weakness. And sometimes it is. But it is also fear, conditioning, and in many cases genuine love that has been twisted into something else. These men are not trying to be doormats. They are trying to be good partners with the tools they were given. Unfortunately, those tools often include erasure, endless apologizing, and the belief that boundaries are selfish. There were moments when my own mask slipped, and I caught a glimpse of what I had become. One day my brother asked me to go fishing with him, a simple thing we used to do without thinking. And my first instinct was not, do I want to? But, will she be upset if I'm gone that long? I heard myself explaining the situation to her like a teenager asking his parents' permission. And a small part of me recoiled. but I pushed that feeling down, because acknowledging it would have meant admitting how far I had drifted from myself. This is the heart of the story for me. A man can lose everything important, self-respect, joy, purpose, without ever leaving his house, simply by making one small self-betrayal after another in the name of keeping the peace. When I finally started studying psychology in a more structured way, I recognized in textbooks and case studies what I had been blindly living. Words like enmeshment, emotional blackmail, intermittent reinforcement, and gaslighting stopped being abstract concepts and became labels for experiences I could now see clearly. That is one of the reasons the original essay feels so intense. It strings together many of these patterns in raw, everyday language, and for men who have never had the vocabulary, it feels like someone turning on the lights in a room they have been stumbling through for years. Take the issue of control disguised as concern. On the surface, questions like, "Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you answer?" can sound like the normal curiosity of a partner who wants ankle monitor. If I didn't respond quickly enough, I knew I would face a tense cross-examination later. "You were online at this time, but you only answered me 5 minutes later. What were you doing in those 5 minutes?" No matter how benign the explanation, it never fully satisfied the underlying suspicion. At first, I over-explained. I wrote long messages reviewing my movements in detail, trying to prove that I had nothing to hide. I showed my screen unprompted, thinking that transparency would build trust. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The more I complied, the more intense the monitoring became. Looking back, I see why. In relationships where one person is deeply anxious about abandonment or betrayal, control can feel like safety. If she knows where I am every minute, if she has access to my messages, if she can track my spending, she feels less vulnerable. But because the anxiety comes from an internal wound, not from my actual behavior, no amount of control ever really soothes it. Instead, it creates a loop. She controls more. I comply more. She respects me less. I feel weaker. She feels both more powerful and less safe. And the spiral continues. There is a paradox here. Many people do not actually desire a partner they can completely control. On some level, they want to feel that their partner is choosing them freely, that he has his own backbone and could walk away but doesn't. When a man gives up all autonomy to prove his devotion, he unintentionally kills the very dynamic of mutua, ice that makes attraction possible. He becomes, psychologically, a son seeking approval rather than an equal adult sharing his life. This is where preemptive paralysis sets in. You stop doing ordinary, harmless things, not because you believe they are wrong, but because you know you will have to justify them in exhausting detail later. You don't meet your friends because the interrogation afterward will drain you. You don't join a gym because it will spark accusations. You don't take a spontaneous detour because the extra minutes will be used as evidence. Your life becomes a narrow hallway of pre-approved activities. Another key mechanism is the way conflict, not to solve problems, but to maintain a certain power balance. In healthy conflict, both people believe some version of, "We are on the same team," trying to solve a shared problem. Even when voices rise, there is eventually a movement toward understanding, compromise, or at least a truce. In dysfunctional conflict, the real goal is different. It is to establish who is right and who is wrong. Who is the victim and who is the villain? Who must apologize and who gets to judge? In my relationship, arguments followed a familiar pattern. A small disagreement over logistics or tone would flare into a larger accusation about my character. I was selfish, inattentive, childish, unreliable. When I tried to explain my perspective, that explanation became further proof that I never listened or always had excuses. If I raised my voice out of frustration, my raised voice became the new problem, erasing whatever issue had started the argument. If I walked away to cool down, my walking away became evidence that I didn't care enough to work on things. In every scenario, my behavior became the central issue, while her provocations or hurtful words faded into the background. Psychologically, this is a form of what some therapists call emotional one-way traffic. One person's feelings are treated as the unquestionable center of the reality, while the other person's feelings only appear as footnotes or counters to be dismissed. Once you accept that system, you will always be in the wrong. It is like playing a game where the rules change each time you get close to winning. The moving goalposts are one of the most exhausting aspects of such relationships. 1 week. The complaint is that you are not emotionally open enough. So you begin to share more. Talk about your fears. Admit your insecurities. At first, this might be welcomed. She seems satisfied that you are finally being vulnerable. But soon, your openness is used against you. Consciously or not, comments like, "You're supposed to be strong," or "I can't be attracted to someone who is so unsure of himself," start to slip into conversations. So you pull back, become quieter, handle your struggles privately. Now the complaint changes. You are distant, cold, shut down. The more you adjust to the current demand, the more likely it is to change. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because the underlying dissatisfaction has nothing to do with the particular behavior being criticized. I have seen this in my clients too. One man, let's call him Mark, told me about an argument where his partner demanded he be more affectionate in public. So he made a conscious effort, held her hand, touched her shoulder, hugged her spontaneously. A few weeks later, she accused him of showing off for others and said it felt fake. Another man was told his career focus meant he didn't care about the relationship. When he turned down a promotion to be home more, he was later criticized for lacking ambition. It's not that every complaint from a partner is illegitimate, of course. Sometimes we truly need to change. But when changing in one direction only leads to being criticized from the other direction, something deeper is wrong. The bedroom often becomes another stage for this dynamic. Sex, in a healthy relationship, is a place where both people can be raw, imperfect, and playful, where criticism is gentle and communication is honest. In a dysfunctional relationship, it can turn into a scorecard of grievances. A place where one partner's fluctuating desire is turned into a weapon. If you really loved me, you would, or, if you were a real man, you wouldn't. When a man's sexual desire or performance is constantly judged, he starts to dread intimacy instead of yearning for it. Ironically, as his anxiety increases, his body may actually respond less reliably, which then becomes further evidence that something is wrong with him, when in fact something is wrong with the relational climate. It is difficult for any human being, male or female, to feel playful and passionate in an atmosphere of ongoing criticism. Another crucial is isolation. I remember the slow thinning of my own social circle. Certain friends were labeled bad influences. Certain relatives were too involved or disrespectful. Invitations to events started to feel like negotiations rather than simple choices. Why do you need to see them? Didn't we just see your family? You never prioritize my side. At first, I tried to balance everything. Over time, It became easier to simply let relationships drift away than to fight about them. I told myself I was just focusing on my relationship, being mature, putting my partner first. It took me years to realize I had accidentally removed every voice from my life that might have questioned the way I was being treated. This isolation is not always a conscious strategy on the partner's part. Sometimes it is, but often it comes from their own insecurity. If you feel that your worth is fragile, you might unconsciously try to limit your partner's access to other sources of validation. But whether deliberate or not, the effect is the same. The man loses reference points, without friends or family giving him outside perspective. He begins to accept the relationship's narrative as the only truth. He is the problem. He is lucky she tolerates him. He must keep improving or he will lose everything. What keeps men stuck in this situation for so long, more than anything else, is intermittent kindness. If the relationship were cruel all the time, leaving would be relatively straightforward. But just often enough, she becomes soft again. There are days when she thanks him, nights when she holds him without criticism, moments when she seems to remember who he was when they first fell in love. Those scattered moments of warmth work like the random rewards in a casino. You never know when they will come. So you keep playing. People will endure a great deal of pain for the sake of occasional relief. I used to tell myself after each good day, "See, we're turning a corner. This time will be different." But nothing structural changed. The same lack of boundaries. The same unspoken rules about who was allowed to be upset and who wasn't. The same belief that my job was to absorb her pain without having any of my own. So the cycle resumed: disappointment, tension, conflict, exhaustion, small sweetness, renewed hope, and then back down again. It was like living on an emotional roller coaster I had never agreed to ride. What finally shifted things for me was the realization that I was participating in my own erosion. I am not responsible for someone else's unresolved wounds, but I am responsible for how long I allow them to direct my life. At some point, self-respect is not a luxury, it is a necessity for survival. The hardest part of stepping out of a destructive pattern is not the logistics. It is the psychological cost. You have to be willing, as the essay bluntly puts it, to be seen as the bad guy. That sounds dramatic, but it is true, especially when your partner is used to you bending, apologizing, and absorbing blame. When you suddenly stop doing that, you disrupt a system. Systems resist change. The first boundary I tried to set was small. I decided I would not answer my phone during a particular meeting at work, even if she called several times. I would send a message before the meeting saying, "I'm busy for the next 2 hours, we'll talk after." And then I would keep that boundary. It felt ridiculously hard. Part of me was terrified that something catastrophic would happen in those 2 hours. Another part of me feared the emotional storm waiting afterward. And yes, when I finally called back, I was met with anger. "Why didn't you answer? What if it was an emergency? Don't you care?" In the past, that kind of reaction would have sent me into a spiral of apology. This time, I held steady. "I told you I was in a meeting. I am allowed to be unavailable sometimes. If there's an emergency, you call the appropriate services. Not my cell in a meeting." My voice shook as I said it. But I said it. That may sound like a small victory, but psychologically it was enormous. For the first time in a long time, I chose my own integrity over her immediate approval. I accepted that she was angry and did not rush to erase that anger by erasing myself. Over the following weeks and months, I set more boundaries. I reconnected with friends without providing detailed reports. I said no to certain demands without offering elaborate justifications. I allowed myself to have a bad day, without pretending everything was fine just to keep the atmosphere light. When control stops working, people who are used to controlling will often intensify their tactics before they adapt. There were tears, accusations, guilt trips. I was called selfish, distant, uncaring. Every new boundary was reframed as a failure of love. It would have been easy to collapse back into my old pattern just to end the discomfort. But I had seen enough, in myself and in other men, to know where that road led, back to numbness, resentment, and slow internal death. The truth that eventually gave me courage was this: staying in a relationship that demands my self-erasure is not an act of love, it is an act of fear. Love without room for boundaries is not love, it is dependency. And dependency that uses guilt and shame to keep the other person in place is not just sad. It is harmful, for both people. When I talk to men now who are in similar situations, I don't simply tell them to leave. That would be too simplistic. And in many cases, not immediately practical. They may have children, shared finances, cultural or religious pressures, and a genuine love for the woman they are with. Instead, I talk about a step-by-step process of reclaiming themselves. That starts internally, long before any external decisions. First, I ask them to remember who they were before the relationship turned sour. What did they enjoy? What were they proud of? Which friendships made them feel alive? Often, they struggle to answer at first. Their identity has become so entangled with keeping her happy that their own preferences feel foreign. We sit with that discomfort. It is like meeting yourself again after years of absence. Next, we examine the beliefs they carry about what it means to be a man. Many have absorbed the idea that a real man is endlessly patient, never complains, absorbs all stress without flinching, provides materially while requiring nothing emotionally, and stays no matter how he is treated. In other words, they believe that to be a man is to be a machine. Machines are replaceable. Human beings are not. A man who never says, "This hurts me," is not strong, he is dissociated. A father who teaches his children that love means accepting disrespect is not modeling virtue. He is modeling self-betrayal. Then we talk about the woman, not as a monster, but as a human being with her own history, her own wounds, her own learned strategies for survival. Some of those strategies may be genuinely cruel. Others may be clumsy attempts to feel safe or valued. The goal is not to excuse harmful behavior, but to understand that it does not come from some magical category called womanhood. It comes from pain, fear, and sometimes entitlement. This perspective is important because it turns the narrative from, "She is evil and I am helpless," into, "She has patterns. I have patterns, and I am responsible for how I respond to hers." At this point, the man must decide what he is willing to tolerate and for how long. Sometimes, when he begins setting boundaries and communicating clearly, the relationship actually improves. A partner who is not deeply committed to control may initially resist, but eventually adapt, realizing that respecting his autonomy does not mean losing him. I have seen couples move from reactive, explosive dynamics to more balanced ones when both partners are willing to examine themselves. Other times, however, the pattern is too entrenched. The partner doubles down on manipulation, refuses to take any responsibility, and treats his new self-respect as a personal attack. In such cases, the man faces a painful truth. He cannot simultaneously protect his mental health and maintain the relationship as it currently exists. Something has to change, and if she will no change how she relates to him, he must change his availability to that relation. Leaving is not a magic cure. It involves grief, fear, financial strain, and sometimes social fallout. But many men tell me that the first morning they wake up in a quiet room where nobody is glaring at them, monitoring them, or silently resenting them. They feel something they had forgotten they could feel: peace. Not excitement, not euphoria, just the simple, sacred absence of walking on eggshells. When I look back on the essay's fiery conclusion, it's called to stop participating in your own destruction. I hear beneath the anger a desperate plea for men to remember that they, too, are human beings with limits and needs. I would phrase it more gently now, but the core remains. You are not a supporting character whose only role is to service someone else's script. Your life is not an audition for the position of good enough partner. You are allowed to expect respect, appreciation, and basic kindness in your own home. There is another dimension that matters deeply to me: what our relationships teach the next generation. Children learn what love looks like by watching the adults around them. If a little boy grows up seeing his father tiptoe, apologize, and shrink while his mother criticizes, controls, and rewrites history, he may internalize that this is simply how men and women interact. He may later either repeat his father's role or overcorrect and become controlling himself. A little girl in the same environment may learn that her feelings are always more important than anyone else's, that love means being worshipped, and that a partner exists mainly to absorb her dissatisfaction. None of this prepares them for mutual, respectful adult relationships. I do not believe in demonizing women or glorifying men. I have seen relationships where the genders are reversed, where a woman is the one slowly erased, and a man is the one wielding control and contempt. The deeper issue is not male versus female. It is human beings using power, shame, and conditional affection to manage their own anxieties, instead of doing the harder work of self-reflection and healing. So what does a healthier model look like? It is not perfect or drama-free. No real relationship is. But in a healthier dynamic, both partners are allowed to have separate inner worlds. Both can say no without that no triggering catastrophe. Both can be upset without their upset becoming a verdict on the other person's worth. Gratitude flows in both directions. Achievements are celebrated rather than resented. Mistakes are addressed, not weaponized. And most importantly, love is not confused with constant anxiety. When a man finds himself in a relationship that feels consistently heavy, where his happiest moments are the ones when his partner is absent, I encourage him to ask some hard questions. Does this relationship enlarge who I am, or does it shrink me? When I'm with her, do I feel more myself or less myself? If my son grew up to be treated the way I am treated now, would I tell him to stay? Or would I gently help him leave? These questions are not meant to provoke impulsive decisions, but to wake up a deeper awareness. Once you see that you have been disappearing in slow motion, you cannot unsee it. The choice then is whether to keep fading or to slowly step back into your own outline. The essay ends with a call to choose yourself. Perhaps for the first time. From the outside, that might sound selfish. From the inside, for someone who has spent years sacrificing every piece of themselves to avoid another person's displeasure. It is not selfish at all, it is an act of moral responsibility. When you reclaim your self-respect, you do not just free yourself. You stop teaching the people around you that it is acceptable to treat others as tools, props, or emotional shock absorbers. You model a different story. That love and respect are not enemies. That boundaries are not punishments. And that a partnership is meant to be a place where two whole people stand side by side. Not one whole person standing on top of another's broken pieces. If there is one message I want to leave etched in your mind, it is this: your life is not an exam graded solely by one partner's satisfaction. Your worth did not begin with her approval. And it does not end with her disappointment. There are women, and men too, who know how to build, not destroy, who can sit with their own discomfort without offloading it onto whoever is closest, who can love in a way that makes you more yourself, not less. Whether that person is the partner you have now or someone you have yet to meet, you will only be able to truly recognize them, and to truly show up for them, when you stop accepting a version of love that requires your disappearance. Choosing yourself is not about walking away from responsibility. It is about walking away from a story in which you are always the villain or the inadequate servant. It is about stepping into a new story where you are allowed to be human. Sometimes strong, sometimes weak, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, always worthy of basic respect. That is not arrogance. That is the baseline of mental health. And once you taste what it feels like to live from that place, even in small, trembling steps, you will understand why no sigh of disappointment, no angry accusation, no guilt-soaked plea for you to go back to being less than you are, is worth the price of your soul.